Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Hank Cisco Show. Let's go.
Welcome to the Hank Cisco Show. I'm Barbara Ann Zippy, your host today, filling in for Hank, always proud to be. And I'm also a writer and executive producer with Ciao Bella Living Italian Style for the Delaware Valley Italian American newspaper. But instead of us going into some of our regional Italian news today, we have a very special guest to bring you that you're all familiar with because she was in your homes for over 30 years on Channel 6. I'd like you to welcome Lisa Thomas-Laury.
Hi, Barbara. So good to see you again.
It's great to have you here in Norristown at the Norristown High School. And the studio environment, how's it feel with the students?
You know, I've been to Norristown High School for whatever engagements over the years, but I know I didn't visit the studio. Very impressive.
It really
Very
is.
impressive.
And John Doyle, who is the head instructor teacher here, who, you know, Italians call every teacher a professor, so I love to say Professor Doyle. He does a great job in pulling all his students together and disseminating a lot of information to the community.
I just met him briefly, but he's very engaged and I can see the commitment.
And
it's
you
beautiful.
know about disseminating information. That was your career.
Right.
As an early woman in this business, you had some really fascinating career entries to talk about in the very early stages.
Yes, you know, I got into this business having started as a weather girl.
Oh my goodness.
You know, and a lot of us, Diane Sawyer started as a weather girl. I'm not sure about Barbara Walters, but especially local media.
Yes.
And I got that opportunity in college. And I knew after this, I was the weekend weather girl from my second semester freshman year until the end. And I knew after about the first year that I didn't want to do weather, but I loved being on camera and I loved talking to an audience, pretending that it was one person. And an internship, a news internship came up and I asked my general manager if I could try out for the news internship and I got it. And fell in love with reporting, not so much anchoring. We didn't have a lot of that. So it's ironic that the first big job I got was for an anchor woman when I never anchored before.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when you did that, your career took you to Maryland for a while?
Actually, it was, I went there for an interview for my first job, but decided to own Oklahoma. So my first job took me to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Wow, that's a far cry from Philadelphia,
I know.
or the region that you came from.
Well, you know, it's funny because because of the on-camera experience as a weather girl, I was pursued by quite a few TV stations when I graduated from college. I had that hands-on experience, and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, was cracking down on stations to hire minorities and women. I was a double minority.
And that was a great time
to
have you, and even volunteering when you did for the school, doing the projects that you did to put you in front of the camera. You never know where they're going to lead you today.
That's right. And, you know, and I never expected to be in Oklahoma City, but of the choices, there was Louisville, Kentucky, Pensacola, Florida, and Oklahoma. And I chose Oklahoma not because it was the farthest, but my mother had a friend in nearby Norman, Oklahoma. So she figured, you know, if something happens, if I get homesick, I could go have a nice hot cooked meal. And I didn't love Oklahoma. I really didn't.
Well, we were glad that we got you eventually.
But
to
I learned a
Philadelphia.
lot. I really learned the nuts and bolts of television news in Oklahoma.
And that's a great place to start because you probably got your hands in every aspect of the news.
I sure did. You know, Barbara, back then, we worked in pairs. We went out as a photographer and forgive me, I'm jumping ahead. We went out as two reporters. All of us had to know how to operate a camera, which was a CP16 back then.
Those were big and heavy.
Yeah, big, what is it, about 11 pounds? We'd heave that thing on our shoulders and I would shoot my partner's story, then he in turn would shoot mine. And sometimes it meant lying on the ground to get certain angles, and We all knew that, so it would be so helpful, so invaluable to me later to know how to edit. You know, we take our stories back after shooting each other's stories. We retreat to this little closet-like room, the editing room, and we would literally splice and glue our film. No tape then.
and to compare to the digital of today, it's nuts and bolts.
Yes.
So you came into the industry really actually physically working with your fingers and your hands besides your motor skills. Now what about that progression? How did you end up in the Philadelphia market?
Well, in Oklahoma, my general manager at the television station where I went to college at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, had told me, this is a great choice, you're going to learn a lot. He knew the general manager there. And he said, try to stay a year. Well, 8 months in, I got a call from Nashville, Tennessee. And I called Boz, and I said, Boz, he said, it's a great opportunity, you're going to go. If you get it, go. So I remember so vividly going down to Nashville on a Sunday afternoon. I was going to have an interview the next morning, Monday, with the news director, Chris Clark, very well known in the industry, because his station, what were the call letters? WTVF, was the first in the country to do satellite, to do live feeds, to live reporting.
Wow.
They were the first to use tape instead of film. So it was, a step up, a very big step up. But they were trendsetters. So that night when I'm in the hotel, I said, let's see what this news is like. I turned on the television set, and when it's sitting on the edge of the bed, and my mouth dropped. There was a young black woman anchoring solo the evening news.
And this was in
1976.
Just to give perspective.
Yes. 1976. I'd never seen a black woman anchoring the news, let alone solo. Right. Usually, we worked in pairs, the man and the woman. So I watched her, and I thought, oh my gosh, her voice, something about her confidence, her poise. And I said, wow, I hope I meet her tomorrow when I go in. So I go in the next day. The secretary sits me right outside the news director, Chris Clark's office. And I glance over the other side of the newsroom, and there's that young black woman that I'd seen the night before. So I said, I know I have time. I popped up. As I walked over to her, she says, aren't you a tall drink of water? And I said, hello, my name is Lisa Howard, because that was my maiden name then.
Yes.
And I just want to say how impressed I was. I said, you're solo anchoring of the news. And she says, well, thank you very much. My name is Oprah Winfrey.
Oh, my goodness.
And I thought at the time, of course, I didn't know Oprah Winfrey. Nobody knew Oprah Winfrey. Right. I just thought, wow, what an unusual name. So I learned that I was going to be shadowing her that day. And I was going to see her put what we call a package together, a news package, where you do an interview and you get the B-roll and and then I was going to get to see her do a live shot, which I'd never seen before because they're the first station. And so we went through our day, and afterwards we just sort of hit it off. And I had thought when I first saw her she couldn't be much older than me, but I wasn't sure. And she asked me to spend the night at her apartment instead of going back to the hotel. And I said, oh, I'd love to, thank you. And we went back and had dinner, and I just remember us sharing stories, and I learned that she was born in 1954, as I was. We had so much in common as far as she had been nominated to go to Girls State, and I had for West Virginia, she had for Tennessee. And because what I noticed was a signature item that we built at Girls State, and it sat on her coffee table. A mansion built out of popsicle sticks.
How about that?
And I remembered the popsicle project. And I said, did you go to Girls Day? And we laughed, and we talked about our boyfriends, how she was heartbroken by Bubba, and it was just a lot of fun. And she also told me, though, on a more serious note, that if I got the job in Nashville as education reporter, she would probably be gone because she was close to getting a job in Baltimore. That's where the Maryland comes in.
That's where the Maryland came in, right?
And she was going to co-anchor with a veteran newscaster who had done it by himself for years. I remember that striking my mind, because I'm thinking, he's a solo anchor, how's he going to feel about that?
Right. And a minority woman at the same time
exactly.
coming in. Yes.
So we kept in touch, and I got the job, and when I came, she had just left for, she was at WJZ in Baltimore, about the 13th market. Both of us in Nashville were at the 35th market, going by size, audience,
always
population.
Working your way up in the market.
That's
reach.
one reason Boss said to take it, because I think Oklahoma was like 47 or something.
Okay.
So we kept in touch, Barbara, and I loved Nashville. I stayed 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years. My mother had gone to Fisk, and there was Meharry and the good-looking doctors, and the
Nashville,
Grand Ole Opry, a lot of culture.
Great town,
Yeah,
fun town.
Exactly. So I had a good time.
And to transition to Channel 6, how did they get lucky to get you?
Well, I got lucky to get them. There was a talent scout back then. It amazes me that I remember all these names. But this talent scout, and just as I said that, I forgot his.
Okay.
Joe Hunter was traveling through, because remember, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, was looking for women to go to some of these stations, for blacks, Hispanic. So Joe Hunter was an African-American talent scout. He came through, and he apparently taped me doing some reports. And he called me up after I'd been there 2 years and said, Philadelphia is looking for a noon anchor. It would be their first African-American noon anchor, or any anchor. And I was, I was first stunned because I knew that Philly was way up there in the top 10. And I found out that they were number 4.
Wow.
Number 4, Dallas was 5. And so
That's a big jump.
A big difference. So of course I said yes, and I was so nervous because they told me the job was an anchor job. I said, well, I have never anchored. They said, oh, well, I think they think that you have potential. I said, okay. So I went up and I actually sat at a desk for my audition and read, even though Joe had submitted my reporting. And then I learned the job was for doing the noon show and then going out to report. So it seemed ideal. And when I got the job, they told me there's just one little small condition. We have a Mark Howard. Mark Howard was doing the 5 and reporting, and they said we don't want to confuse the viewers with Lisa Howard and Mark Howard, wondering if you're related, if you're married. Would you change your name? And I said, sure. I took my mother's maiden name,
Which
Thomas.
is Thomas.
And I came to WPVI as
It's Lisa Thomas, and your fans, and they just fell in love with you. And you came into one of the hottest news teams in the city.
That didn't hurt.
And actually, an icon in Philadelphia is Jim O'Brien.
Yeah.
I mean, your co-anchors, of course, were
I was
Larry
so
King.
lucky to be co-anchoring when I hadn't before with Jim O'Brien. People saw him as that.
That was the dream. It was Jim O'Brien, Larry King.
Well, Larry King was first, yes. But when I came, Larry wasn't still there.
Oh, okay.
Jim Gardner had come in as the noon anchor and had been promoted early on as the 6th, and Larry had gone to New York.
Oh, that's right. He took a little brief
escape. Well, he never came back once he left.
Right.
But I came as Jim had been the main anchor for 1 year. And Jim O'Brien was doing everything. He was on every newscast. Did you know that?
I didn't realize he was from the afternoon to the evening, late in the evening.
He did Dialing for Dollars in the morning.
Oh, that's right. Dialing for Dollars. That's a long time show a lot of our viewers might remember.
He did Dialing for Dollars in the morning at 10. Then he did the noon show with me when I came. And then he did the 5 to 6 o'clock with Mark Howard co-anchoring. And he did the weather at 6 and 11. He was on straight
He
through.
lived there.
Yeah.
Well, he was a great mentor to have.
Let me tell you, he cared so much about that station and its success and the people in it. And I had sort of an adjustment period for the first 4 to 6 months. And he took me under his wing and really helped me through that period. And it was just a blessing, it was a blessing because, management didn't like my hair, Barbara. It was too thick and curly, and they said I had an Appalachian twang, and I was bungling
So you
some
probably had to
words.
go to a speech therapist.
They brought one to me.
They brought one
From
to you.
Temple, but she was good. Julia Wing, she was good, and she helped me talk in a universal dialect. She told me when she came I could help some other people around here, and she helped me breathe for my diaphragm. So it was wonderful. It really, really was good.
And then, back then, really, they were trying to fulfill FCC requirements, but at the same time make the people that they were fulfilling the requirements look like someone other than yourself. When you were saying about your hair, I know that you mentioned some instances in your book where it was a disaster.
Well, let me tell you. I'm going to be really straightforward. I learned later that Oprah had tried out for my job. She didn't like Jay-Z. The anchor man that she was paired up with resented.
Probably didn't like her too much.
Resented the fact that he was put with a woman. He didn't, it was rough. She wanted to come to Philly. I didn't learn that till I visited her at Harpo Studios in Chicago.
Okay.
When she became syndicated and was a big star. But remember the race relations
Right.
in Philadelphia. I'm certain that the powers to be at Channel 6 wanted that to be as smooth a transition as possible. And they knew that it was going to be a jolt to have a black person,
Yes.
man or woman,
Yes.
to come on and replace what had been solely Caucasian, white, men. And Oprah and I, when we first got together after that, she mentioned it to me, and I looked and I said, I know why. She says, you do, don't you? I was light-skinned. The audience would receive me better, they thought. They might think I was Italian, they might think I was Hispanic. They chose me because I was light-skinned. And Oprah would have been, hey,
I'm here.
I'm here and I'm black. And they were worried about what the viewers would think, how that would affect their ratings, how she would be received. But she understood, and even then was being was a big believer in destiny.
Yes.
And look where she went.
And many immigrants had to overcome obstacles. Many different cultures and races have different perceptions today.
Right.
So, but you experienced this firsthand in the major throes of that change, and to be in a major market to undergo that
Exactly,
change.
Barbara. Exactly.
But Philadelphia embraced you, Lisa.
They did.
Your career with them brought you a husband, brought you sons. You covered the beautiful
royal wedding.
The royal wedding.
The royal wedding. Oh, that was a dream
Was
job.
it a surprise to be said that you were going to go?
Yeah, to go overseas, sure. But it was a dream job. I mean, we worked our tails off because of the time difference. I think there's a 5-hour difference between London, and we didn't do live shots then.
And there were no cell phones then.
Right, no cell phones, and I didn't do live. Everything was recorded, so we had to feed it via satellite. I think it was satellite, maybe it wasn't even satellite. But anyway, we had to feed it back. So our producer, Cheryl Fair, and the photographer and the editor and myself, we got about 3 hours sleep a night. But it was fun.
But
just
your
meeting
adrenaline
everyone.
just
yeah,
to
it
do
kicked
that.
in. And it was a fabulous job. I remember where I was when Diana died, thinking, wow, I wanted to cover it and I didn't. I wanted to be there as a journalist, but I was on vacation. I was away at some island, and they sent someone else instead. And I was sort of glad. It was such a sad ending to her.
Especially having covered such a magnanimous day in
like
her
her
life.
wedding.
Yeah, to cover that would
Yeah.
have been very emotional. But
Right.
your viewers have really gone through a lot of emotions with you.
Yeah, I guess so, Barb.
They,
Yeah.
I was with you at one of your book stops, and they one of the ladies knew how old your children were because she had children with you at
the
same
same
time.
hospital. I
Yes.
remember her. She said, I was down the hall, and she had at least one son who was the age of my Langston. But boy, my babies are 37 and 34 years old now.
But how long were you on Channel 6 with
38 years.
38 years.
And that doesn't include the 3 years almost that I was off because of my illness.
Which leads to
Yeah.
the book
Yeah.
and the reason for that.
Yeah.
Well, I remember, being around the industry a little bit. I do remember, Lisa's back, or Lisa had to go away. Then Lisa's back.
Right.
Oh, but she's not back full time yet. And then she had to go away again.
Yeah.
And it was, the viewers really felt that emotion for
Yeah,
you. And I
yeah.
know that you felt their prayers, but they never really felt fulfilled with the story that you tell here.
Yeah, and the station, I remember they sent Anita Brickman, who was health reporter, and every now and then they would do something. And I think I was on one parade, but I guess, you get bits and pieces of it. But, I never planned to write a book.
No?
I never planned. I wasn't sure what I would do. My disease came back in 2015 after I was out. It was misdiagnosed. And it came back. It started to erupt again. I had a second bone marrow transplant in 2015. And
for our viewers, that is a major, major operation of, you have to be reclusive and, much.
People always ask me, is it painful, because they think of bone marrow. They take it through your blood now, but I mean, it is so devastating in that it wipes you out. I was there at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester for 2 months before I even began to get a little strength back. I mean, they bring your immune system to zero. After I leave, I have to get all my shots again. From 2015, because of the way they were spaced, I'm just getting all of my MMR, got my polio first, but certain shots like varicella, you get that over a period of a year and they build you back up. So, you have to be, my disease was misdiagnosed for almost 3 years. So, in my son, my youngest son, Leland, would always ask me, Mom, when are you going to write your book? I thought of him as a 9-year-old kid, my little boy, thinking it's cool to write a book. And one day we're sitting watching a health show, and he says, Mom, don't you understand how many people you would help? And when I thought of it that way, I said, wow, Lee, you may be onto something. He said, you think? He was very serious about telling me I would help people.
And you are a trusted reporter. The public welcomed you for all those years, so they trust you to tell your story.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure that helped. But I just, when Leland said that, he had worked at his father's office, and I had helped Bill in the beginning, and I remember, I said, no, Lee, you're right. I remember some of my husband's patients.
Well, we have to tell our viewers that your husband is a doctor.
A doctor, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. He's a doctor in Philadelphia, an internist.
With your husband being a doctor, it still took 3 years to diagnose you.
It still took 3 years. But I remembered his patients, and I thought, some of his patients are from West Philadelphia and Southwest Philadelphia. They just don't have the resources. Some of them because of age, some of them because they're poorer, but most of them are black. And I thought, gosh, this was so hard for me. And I wanted to help them navigate our health system and teach them some of the things I learned the hard way.
Right.
So it was extremely helpful. And Leland got me my publisher. He went out and got everything set.
Well, he has a good example. Tony Bennett's son manages him.
Oh, really?
And so many of the second generation.
Oh.
So that's a good sign.
Yeah, it is a good sign.
But one of the things that you went through that is so impressive and courageous of you, and your husband's a doctor. Mm-hmm. You are an investigative reporter, too, as part of what you've done for a living. And yet, one of the biggest dilemmas facing so many of our families today is drug addictions to, they all hear about OxyContin. And even if we're informed and we know things, we can still have a problem.
Oh.
And this is such a big surprise in your book that resonated with so many people.
Yeah, and I didn't always plan to tell it. But after my older son's friend, this would make 3 friends between my sons who died because of opioid abuse. One took their life. After that happened, I said, I'm definitely going to tell my side story. They need to know that this is a serious problem, that it could happen to any of us. And it could happen to your evening newscaster who's on the TV giving you the news. I thought it was very important. And it's funny because I had asked my hematologist/oncologist at the Mayo Clinic, the woman who saved my life. She said, I'm going to give you some OxyContin for the pain, your nerve pain, which was horrible. I said, okay, and I said, but I am just a little concerned. I said, there's addiction in my family. My father was an alcoholic. I'm worried about addiction. Oh, no, you don't have to worry. That won't happen to you. That's what she told me. And of course it did happen to me. And years later, she would apologize to me. And I realized that the doctors are unaware. So that we as regular consumers and residents are unaware. But she felt that because my husband was a doctor and I was an educated woman, that I would not get addicted to OxyContin or another opioid. And I did. And I remember when I realized it, we were taking my son to the airport. He was going to Brazil to see his college roommate for Carnival. And he had gotten the time wrong. Oh. So he missed the plane. And I'm thinking, like I'm always the resourceful mom, I'm like, oh, you know what, there's a flight out of Dulles in Washington, D.C. You can still make that connection and get to Rio. And I didn't think at all that I didn't have my evening dose of OxyContin. It was going to be 2 more hours down, 2 more hours up, back home.
Wow.
I had the worst case of withdrawal that I wouldn't wish it on anyone. My husband had to put the child locks on. I was literally going to open the door.
In the car.
Yeah. I got cold, I got chills. I went home, I didn't even get out of the car. It was so debilitating. My husband brought me my dose, and the next morning I called a rehab, they call it dependency program.
Okay.
At Rochester, Mayo. And I went in 3 weeks, I kicked that habit and never went back. Now, it's not that easy for everyone.
No, it's not.
It's not that easy.
But it's also not that easy to come out about the story either,
right.
Because people are embarrassed to say it.
There's still a stigma. Yeah, there is still a stigma associated with it, but it's too important. Opioid addiction used to hit urban areas, and affect minority teenagers and young adults. And now, of course, we have it everywhere.
It's everywhere.
It's in the suburbs, and some more attention is being paid to it now because of that. But it still needs attention.
Even though it's getting attention,
yes.
It still has people caught up in it.
And our caregivers are better, but
yes.
Sometimes they push that on you too fast. It's not a cure-all.
But for the people who do need to take it, in the defense of those that do need it for a while, it's just a precaution. It really needs caution.
It needs to be monitored.
Caution.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It needs to be monitored by a doctor, and I think family members need to be more aware and monitor it as well.
And you mentioned about family members and monitoring. Being your own health advocate. I think you have some strong feelings about that you could share with our viewers.
Oh, I sure do. Oh, I mean, I stress it every time I go to speak. You must be your own advocate for your health care, because I remember when actually there was a friend of my husband's, not just a friend, but a mentor, someone who taught him at Jefferson, where he went to medical school, who got my diagnosis correct. He correctly diagnosed me, but he was on his way to Morehouse to do research, medical research. He couldn't be my doctor. He referred me to 2 other physicians. One was at Johns Hopkins, and that doctor, if you have a doctor who doesn't give you eye contact, He only talked to my husband, and I'm sure it had something to do with the fact that he's a fellow physician. But you know in your heart, in your gut, what you're feeling. This was a doctor, I would see him maybe starting out every 3 weeks, then every 3 months, and every time he would see me, oh, you're walking so much better. Oh, you're so improved. And all I wanted to tell him was how bad I was feeling and how I'm not improving. If you notice, I walked in here and now I'm in a wheelchair, you know, that's when you leave. And I hung on because it was a rare disease and I didn't know how many other people could help. Bill, the same reason. But at least we asked the right questions. So when my son suggested the book, I thought immediately, we asked the right questions. And it was approaching 3 years. Imagine what some people who don't always know the right questions, they're either still living with something that's misdiagnosed.
Or you just don't feel that you're as competent
Right, you don't have the confidence.
As a physician. But you do know your body.
Yeah, and you're right. Being your own advocate, doing some research on your own, you know, just finding out, asking questions. If you don't feel good, you're not feeling a certain doctor, move on. I remember one time I lost it. We were down here with this particular doctor at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and I just screamed, you know, please don't talk to my husband. You know, nothing wrong with my ears, talk to me. And I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. I'm so glad I didn't curse. And my husband was getting embarrassed, and he said, it's okay, it's okay. And I said, no, but he doesn't listen to me. I'm not feeling right. And the doctor looked at Bill and said, we're going to have to get her some Zoloft.
Which is to sedate you, which had to make you just even scream more.
It's an antidepressant. I wanted to smack him. Well, needless to say, I didn't go back.
No.
And that's what people have to remember. The doctor, you know, bedside manner does make a difference.
It does.
Doctors should care. They should listen, above all. And what I found about some doctors, and I told my husband, if you don't know, send me to someone who does.
Right.
They've got big egos.
Right.
And sometimes if they're not sure, you know, you don't want to be their human guinea pig.
Nobody knows the answer to everything.
Right.
And
So
having a doctor, and actually, a lot of doctors don't mind you trying for a second opinion.
Exactly.
They shouldn't feel intimidated
This
by
doctor
it.
was the head of the department, and I should have left much sooner, but I had a gastroenterologist back up here in Philly who found the answer, Gary Newman. And he had been following me, and he had said, I'm not sure if they left my husband's mentor's diagnosis, which was correct, and thought I had CIDP, chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. It's an autoimmune disease. I won't be able to get into it long because of our time,
Right.
but I had poems. I have poems. It's an acronym. Every letter represents a symptom. Polyneuropathy, organomegaly, enlarged organs. I had enlarged liver. E is for the endocrine system. I had, what do you call it? Hyperthyroidism.
Okay.
And M is for the blood. It's a blood cell dyscrasia disorder, not an autoimmune disease. The blood, monoclonal gammopathy. And then skin changes. My skin was like a weird bluish gray color. So I had 3 of the 5 symptoms. And after Dr., his name was Edgar Kenton, after he left, they said, oh, I think she has CIDP, not this other one. Took me going to the Mayo Clinic for them to go back to the poems. And
your original diagnosis.
my original diagnosis, and which called for a bone marrow transplant. Barbara, by then, I couldn't walk across my kitchen floor. I was bound to a wheelchair. I lost 71 pounds.
Wow.
My thyroid, my larynx, my voice box was paralyzed. A nerve in my stomach was paralyzed. I wasn't digesting food. And when the wonderful doctor at Mayo said, you have poems, you had it all along, she said, it's shutting you down. You're too weak to have a bone marrow transplant. I went home for 3 months to get stronger. And then I had the bone marrow transplant in 2001 and was good for like 13, 14 years. So they've come up with some new meds, and they've come up with, new, this and that. So, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that I won't have to go through a third bone marrow transplant, but I will if I have to.
And you will if you have to, because you have a beautiful grandson.
Oh,
And we
thanks.
just saw you over the holidays reuniting on a happy note with Dave Roberts.
Gosh, that was so much fun.
Over at the Thanksgiving Day Parade for the 100th year.
Yes, a big thank you to 6ABC and General Manager Bernie Perzenica for asking us back.
I think that was a great
Because we were initially going to go to Dallas to visit my brothers. But I told them, I said, this is probably a one-time opportunity.
Lifetime.
I won't be here for the next 100.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a big one.
So we stay. So I decided to stay, and they're going to come for New Year's, and just getting back with Dave, who I did so many things. The parade for 21 years. Dave and I did the parade.
Yes, you did.
And he's such a wonderful guy, and just so selfless. And we just had so many good years, and it was a delight to be with him again.
Well, I know our viewers just had to have a great time listening to your stories today. I do want to remind them that they could follow you on your Facebook page, right?
Right.
Follow Lisa Thomas-Laury on her Facebook page. Her books are available on Amazon. You have her email address to contact her. And parting words of advice. We know your healthcare words of advice.
Yes.
And we're so glad to see you up and about and healthy and on a positive note. What about young people and their career choices breaking into this industry today? Because we are here among the students of Norristown High School.
Yes. Well, I remember what I used to say 20 years ago, and to young junior high school students, and I say pretty much the same thing now, and that is to read. You get away from reading with all this, the technology we have for our youngsters, but read. Youngsters should read everything they can get their hands on. And when you look at your major, don't necessarily look at two subjects that match. Like, okay, I'm gonna major in broadcasting, I'm gonna minor in English. How about broadcasting and political science or a language? Because I didn't really love politics when I first got into the business, but I sort of made myself learn to love it.
Absolutely, you go where the opportunities are.
Yes, and that took reading. I loved reading about the history of politics during the Civil Rights Movement and different presidents and the decision making.
Well, books and newspapers and magazines are not dead yet, according to us,
Right.
right, Lisa?
That's right.
We like the printed word.
Me
So
too.
whether you're reading the Delaware Valley Italian American Herald or trying to find and buy Lisa Thomas-Laury's new book, because it is a great read, and if you ever have a chance to hear her in person, please go out. Thank you again for being on the Hank Cisco Show.
My pleasure, Barbara. Great to be with you. Proceeds go to the Mayo Clinic.
Proceeds go to the Mayo Clinic. That sounds like a good one. And until I see you next time, ciao, Bella.